So I'd very much like to welcome Minister Jenta to the stage. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, namahi whakanui kia koutou. Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Liz, and thanks everyone for your patience. It took a little bit longer to get here than we were expecting, but I was riding in a Tesla Model X, so it was quite enjoyable for me, first time. I'd like to start by acknowledging the mana whenua na iwi whānui no Tamaki Makaurau, and I'd also like to acknowledge Conference and the organizers of this fantastic event who have made today possible, and I think that events like these are very important. Each of the sponsors for the work that you're doing in supporting Aotearoa New Zealand's growing economy through offering sustainable products and services which are critical to the future of our nation. Our government has a vision for making New Zealand the best place to be a child. And that means thinking about our medium and long-term future. Creating a modern, future-focused transport system, and electric and low-emission vehicles are going to be a big part of how we reduce our dangerous carbon pollution from transport. I probably don't have to tell people in this room, but climate change is the single biggest challenge that humanity is facing. And we don't actually have a lot of time to start making the transition. New Zealand is a bit behind. I feel in the last decade, we dropped the ball a bit. We're one of only 3 countries in the OECD to not have fuel efficiency standards, along with Russia and Australia. And for that reason, the average fuel economy of vehicles entering the fleet is less efficient than most other countries that we would compare ourselves to. Not just the EU and Japan, which obviously is much worse than Japan, but even China and India and the US all have better average fuel economy of vehicles entering their fleet right now. And unless we do something different, nothing is going to change. In the last 5 years, we've seen transport emissions grow. It's been the fastest growing sector of carbon emissions in New Zealand. And this is at a time when we need to be reducing our pollution from transport. So we're a bit behind, but this government is keen to take the effective action and implement policies that will support the transition and help us speed up the uptake of low emissions vehicles. So I thought I'd mainly talk about the 2 policies that are out for consultation right now. How many of you have seen or heard of the Clean Car Discount and the Clean Car Standard? Great. Well, I don't want to explain a whole lot of stuff that you already know. So maybe I'll just do a really brief run through the way the policies have been designed, what their intention is, the evidence that we have, why we've designed them that way. But then I also just want to emphasize that we don't assume that they're perfect. We're having this consultation right now. So on the Ministry of Transport website, if you Google Clean Cars, Ministry of Transport, you'll be able to find the discussion document, an opportunity for formal submission on the policies, and also opportunities to just do a quick survey, which it would be great if you could share that with as many people as possible on LinkedIn, on other types of social media, or around your office, because we need to get feedback from people. And in particular, I'm keen to get feedback from people who are at the cutting edge of this industry, who are already moving on cleaner vehicles. So as I said, New Zealand has one of the least efficient fleets, one of the oldest fleets, and the new vehicles coming into the country are actually the ones that are going to lock in high levels of dangerous carbon pollution for many decades into the future. Many people assume that it's the secondhand vehicles coming in from Japan that are the problem with pollution, but actually it's not true. Because Japan has really good fuel economy, and the most popular secondhand vehicles that we are importing are actually much more likely to be efficient than inefficient. It's actually the brand new gas guzzlers that we've been importing in large numbers for the last few years that are the problem. And that's where we need to ensure that there is a shift both in the standard and the price signals that ensure that people can weigh up the lifetime carbon emissions of the vehicle at the point of purchase. we know from evidence, the OECD is very clear on this, that just putting a price signal on petrol or diesel, which are currently in the ETS, doesn't really shift people's views when it comes to purchasing a vehicle. There are many other factors about a vehicle that are more likely to influence their choice of vehicle. So if we don't put the price signal at the point of purchase of the vehicle, it's likely that we won't really make a huge difference. And then by the time we have a carbon price that would influence people's purchase of vehicles, we'll end up with a cripplingly high petrol price that would make it very difficult for people to get around in the vehicles they already have. So the Clean Car Discount is aimed at making it more affordable and accessible for families to access lower emissions vehicles. It only applies to vehicles that are new to New Zealand, so brand new vehicles and secondhand imports. And at the point of first registration in New Zealand, all vehicle importers are required to register the grams of carbon tailpipe emissions per kilometre. And based on that, it's very much a performance measure. It's technology neutral. Based on the number of carbon emissions, you either get a discount, and so a pure EV zero emissions car gets the largest discount. A plug-in hybrid gets the next largest discount. So pure EV, we're proposing a discount of $8,000 on a brand new EV, almost $7,000 on a plug-in hybrid. A conventional petrol hybrid is close to $4,000 discount. And then some very efficient petrol cars in the first few years of the discount do get the discount. There's a zero band of vehicles which is shifting through each year throughout the period that the policy would cover. And then all those discounts are funded through fees on higher emitting vehicles. And on a brand new vehicle, the ones that are most likely to pay the highest fee, which is $3,000, are your luxury SUVs like the Range Rover or Land Rover that are extremely fuel-intensive vehicles. They are vehicles that retail for over $100,000, so they're the ones who would pay the highest fee. It's not large as a percentage of the cost of the vehicle. We'd also be applying the discount to secondhand vehicles, but the discounts and the fees would be lower on the basis that those vehicles are going to have lower lifetime emissions or savings in New Zealand because they're older vehicles. And there'd be a zero band for that as well. And then, of course, what really drives the savings is the adoption of fuel efficiency standards, which, as I said, most OECD countries have had for quite some time. And because New Zealand has lacked standards, we are actually offered less efficient versions of the same cars. The same make and model in the UK might be more efficient than what is being sold in New Zealand. And that's because the more efficient technology is a little bit more expensive, but it tends not to influence the price of the vehicle at the point of purchase. There's all these other factors about size, performance, that affects purchase price. So the manufacturers kind of get a direct profit benefit from selling less efficient vehicles. And the industry has said to me that the larger vehicles are more profitable for them. The less efficient versions of the larger vehicles are more profitable. We have to work together with industry to find a standard that is going to be viable, that is not going to impose too high compliance cost, but it is entirely possible. Indeed, many other countries have already cracked this nut. We're not reinventing the wheel, but we have looked at designing a standard that would ensure there was kind of maximum flexibility, because we understand that there are people in New Zealand who, there is a preference for some larger utility vehicles, off-road capacity. We don't have the best roads out in our rural regions. So we've designed this standard to target an average fuel economy and allowing for a different standard based on the size and weight of the vehicle. So there is the ability through the standard to still bring in your utes, your SUVs, and what we will do is drive that we get more of the most efficient versions of each class of vehicle. So it's entirely possible that compact cars are not as efficient. There's efficient compact cars and inefficient compact cars. There are more efficient utes and SUVs and vans, and there are less efficient ones. So the way the standard is designed is to enable that flexibility, to have a range of vehicles but get the most efficient of each one. And then, of course, you'd offset bringing in the more larger polluting vehicles by importing and selling more of the cleaner cars. And the reason, it's technology neutral and we start where we start is because we understand that this is going to be a transition, and New Zealand is starting from behind a lot of other countries. We need to make sure that we are ensuring that there is social equity, that those with less resources are not disadvantaged. And I do believe the research we've done, the analysis around the policies shows that we've covered off. It's not going to disproportionately negatively impact low-income households or people living in hardship, because quite simply they're much less likely to buy a new-to-New Zealand vehicle. And the more efficient vehicles that we can bring in, which will then start to become the second-hand domestic market, the more low-income households will benefit from having access to those efficient vehicles that cost less money to run. And I'm very much aware that these two policies together, the evidence is that standards combined with taxes and incentives, price incentives, are the most effective way to reduce harmful carbon emissions from the transport fleet. But while they are necessary, they are not sufficient. We know that government does have a role to play with the private sector in ensuring that there is adequate charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. We are funding some charging stations, partially funding charging stations through ECA's contestable fund, and there's a range of other things that need to be considered. There has been an exemption on EVs for road user charges, which was always due to expire in 2021. What we know about that policy is it wasn't particularly effective at driving purchase decisions, because effectively it's operating cost savings. So when people go out, many of the people who are motivated to buy an EV or a plug-in hybrid are doing so for other reasons, and they already have the means to do so. Upfront cost of the vehicle is the single biggest barrier to people switching to an EV. And so the Clean Car Discount is designed to address that barrier and enable more people to have access to a range of lower emissions cars. But for fairness, but also because it's going to be a much more effective incentive to have that upfront price incentive, we will have to bring EVs into the road user charging system. But it is my expectation that a lot of work will be done to ensure that the rates at which they're brought in are not disadvantaging or penalizing EVs relative to petrol cars. And I know there have been some concerns expressed that the current road user charge regime is potentially unfair to smaller, efficient vehicles. So just rest assured, if you're interested in EVs, if you're an EV owner, while road user charges are going to be applied to all vehicles, because all vehicles using the road do need to pay for the construction and maintenance and upkeep of our road network, it will not be done in a way that disadvantages EVs. And so there will still be a price advantage. And of course, I see, although it's technology neutral, I saw a hydrogen SUV out there. There's going to, there can be a range of ways to reduce emissions in vehicles, but I just want to acknowledge that New Zealand is particularly well placed to electrify our transport fleet because we have such a high percentage of renewable electricity, and we have more than enough renewable consented to meet the demand if there was a large and quick uptake of electric vehicles. So I see electrification as being very logical, especially for the light fleet in the short to medium term. So I'm really open to answering questions, because I think probably you'll have your own questions for me. But I know it has taken some time for us to get our clean car policies ready, and that's because we really were starting from scratch. The previous government did no work on this, and they are chunky policies that will have a major impact on New Zealand, so we want to make sure that we get it right. But I am absolutely committed to delivering evidence-based policy that's going to support and enable New Zealand households and businesses to have access to lower emissions vehicles. We know how important that is. We have to make it easier for people to respond to the challenge of climate change, and we as a country all have to work together to clean up the vehicles that are coming into New Zealand, and we're all going to benefit from that.
We've actually got an app where people can submit their questions. So there's a couple who are coming in, so I shall read these out as faithfully as I can. It said, Julie, you mentioned that climate change is the single biggest issue facing the planet, which means we need action now. Why do we need consultation just to get onto it and, and to do it? New Zealand has most of the OECD to use as an example for these policies.
No, I hear that. I've been informed by the public service that this is how we have to do things, and I have challenged it. But I mean, we do live in a democracy, and that means that it's really important that we involve people in the design of our policies, and that we hear from the public. I don't think it would have been possible unless maybe we had a Green-only government. But even the Greens are very committed to democracy. So I think consultation is the way that you get buy-in and you ensure good design of your policies. But I'm impatient to see them implemented as well.
Next question. Julie, how do we get the New Zealand government fleet changed over to EV or PHEV at the same time as introducing a clean car emissions? If it can't be done, how do we expect wider New Zealand to do it? Perhaps FBT rules that advantage youths might be part of the answer.
I have a very good story about the government fleet. And we are only just starting, because despite the fact that previous government apparently set a target for the government fleet being a third EVs by 2021, no work had actually been done on that when we got into office. And the minister responsible at the time, it was David Parker, who was the then Minister for Economic Development, which has recently been reshuffled, so it's now Minister of Transport and Economic Development, Phil Twyford. But they've done a lot of work. We have a online, and I can provide the link for this later if anyone's interested, a dashboard that tells you the exact numbers of low emissions vehicles in the government fleet, and we've set a target to have zero emissions, all new vehicles to the fleet by 2025. So that is at a substantially faster rate than what we are proposing with the Clean Car Standard for New Zealanders. The Clean Car Standard is aiming an average fuel economy of 105 grams of carbon per kilometre by 2025. And so for the government fleet, we're looking at zero emissions by 2025. And so it is quite a steep curve to get there. And we're working with government chief executives and departments, and obviously the government fleet extends to far more than just government ministries. We're talking about district health boards to ensure that all of these purchases that government is making are supporting the transition to lower emissions vehicles.
Yep, sure.
The point about fringe benefit tax, yes, I have asked for advice about that, and I do agree that it is a real problem to have this sort of loophole in our fringe benefit tax system, and it's probably part of the reason for the huge proliferation of double cab utes that you see out there, especially branded ones. For consultants and accountants, and it's because there's a tax advantage to those vehicles, and I think that's a real problem.
Questions are coming in thick and fast. We've probably got time for a few more. Will the discounts be applied to the all-of-government contract for vehicles?
Yeah, it would be applying to all vehicles at the point that they're imported. So although we have yet to determine exactly how they will be applied, I think it would be logical that you get the discount or you pay the fee at the point of purchase. But we'll be working with the importers, and yes, it would apply to government vehicles as well.
And a quick question here, how will the electricity lines network meet the issues for smaller rural areas that are already marginal for increased electricity supply and demand?
Well, my understanding is that EECA's done a lot of modelling on this, and that as a country, we don't have an issue with capacity. There's plenty of spare capacity overnight, but that specific issue of access for rural areas is one that I probably can't answer in detail. I think that for our rural areas, that's where the opportunities with solar and microgeneration really come in and would play a fantastic role with EVs. If people are off-grid, they have that opportunity to have additional capacity off-grid, and then the storage in the car battery.
And I've got one last quick one. Post the consultation period, when will the Clean Car Policy come into effect? Will it be after the RUC exemption ends?
The proposal in the consultation is that they basically, the RUC exemption ends when the Clean Car discount starts. But I am very mindful and aware that the longer the gap between the consultation and the implementation of the policy, the more problematic from the point of view of supporting quick uptake of EVs. So we are exploring options for implementation and how to speed that up.
Thank you very much. We need to get on to our next speaker. We've managed to race through a few quick questions for Julie Anne, so thank you very much.